I'm Catherine, 29 female. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the house I grew up in. I work as a data scientist, a job that's demanding but allows me to work from home, which made saving money by living with my parents seem like a smart financial decision. It was a comfortable, predictable life, one built on the quiet assumption that my contributions, both financial and emotional, were valued. That all changed during one Sunday dinner, when a single, casual sentence from my mother revealed that my place in the family was not just undervalued, but entirely disposable. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. Sunday dinners at my parents' house were a tradition as old as I was. They were sacred rituals of roasted chicken, overboiled vegetables, and the slow, comforting drone of my father, Robert, recounting his week managing construction sites. My mother, Helen, a retired teacher, would orchestrate the affair with a gentle but firm hand, ensuring everyone's plate was full and the conversation never strayed into anything too controversial. It was predictable, safe, and until that evening, the bedrock of my week. I was paying a decent portion of the mortgage as rent, covering all the utilities and groceries, and generally acting as the responsible, live-in daughter. It was an arrangement that seemed to benefit everyone. I was saving aggressively for a down payment on my own place, and they had financial help and the peace of mind of having me around. That particular Sunday started no differently. The air was thick with the scent of rosemary and garlic. I'd spent the afternoon helping my mom peel potatoes, listening to the same stories about her former students I'd heard a dozen times before. My dad was in the living room, watching golf with the volume turned up just a little too loud. It was the picture of domestic tranquility. The only thing missing was my older brother, Liam, and his wife, Sophia. They were perpetually late, a habit my mother excused as artistic temperament. Liam was a freelance musician, and Sophia was a self-proclaimed lifestyle blogger, a career that seemed to consist mostly of taking aesthetically pleasing photos of expensive coffee. They finally breezed in an hour late, all apologies and effusive charm. Sophia, dressed in a brand-new designer dress that screamed, "We're not struggling," hugged my mother tightly, while Liam gave my dad a casual pat on the back. They brought with them an energy that always felt slightly performative, as if they were guest stars on the weekly show of our family life. Dinner was served, and the conversation flowed around the usual topics: Dad's latest project, a new commercial building downtown, Mom's garden club gossip, and a lengthy, detailed account from Sophia about her recent brunch at a trendy new restaurant. Liam mostly nodded along, a placid smile on his face, a master of passive participation. I was halfway through my second helping of mashed potatoes when my mother cleared her throat, a small, significant sound that cut through the chatter. "We have some family news we'd like to share," she announced, her eyes sparkling with an excitement that immediately put me on edge. My father set down his fork and looked at Liam and Sophia with a proud, paternal smile. My mind raced through the possibilities. Were they pregnant? Had Liam finally landed a stable gig? "Liam and Sophia have had a bit of bad luck with their apartment," Mom began, her tone shifting to one of sympathetic concern. "The owner is selling, and they have to be out by the end of the month. It's all very sudden, and with the rental market the way it is," she trailed off, letting the dramatic pause hang in the air. Sophia picked up the thread seamlessly. "It's just been a nightmare," she sighed, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a napkin, though her eyes were perfectly dry. "We've looked everywhere, but everything is so expensive, and Liam's work can be so unpredictable. We're just not sure what we're going to do." I felt a pang of sympathy. The rental market was brutal. I knew that firsthand from my own casual searching. "That's terrible," I said sincerely. "Is there anything I can do to help?" "I can help you look online. I'm pretty good with search filters and—" "That's sweet of you, dear," my mother interrupted, patting my hand. "But your father and I have already figured out a solution. Family has to help family after all." There it was, the phrase that had governed my entire life, the one used to justify every sacrifice, big or small. Robert, my father, finally spoke up, his voice full of patriarchal authority. Your brother and his wife need a place to stay while they get back on their feet, so they'll be moving in here for a while. I nodded. It made sense. The house was big enough. Okay, I said. We can make that work. The guest room is a bit small for 2 people, but... That's when my mother delivered the line that fractured my world. She laughed, a light, airy sound that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, honey, no, they won't be in the guest room. They need a proper space, a place to feel at home. They'll be taking your room. I stared at her, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. The noise of the room faded to a dull buzz in my ears. It had to be a joke. A poorly timed, incredibly unfunny joke. My room, I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. But where am I supposed to go? Mom smiled, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. Your brother and his wife need a place to stay, so you'll be moving into the garage for now. I laughed. I actually let out a short, sharp bark of laughter, convinced this was some elaborate prank. The garage was an unfinished, concrete-floored space filled with my dad's old tools, holiday decorations, and a family of spiders that had been homesteading there since the early 2000s. It was cold in the winter, suffocating in the summer, and had exactly 1 bare bulb for light. The garage? You're joking, right? I looked from my mom's smiling face to my dad's stoic one, searching for a crack in the facade. There was none. Sophia chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Oh, Catherine, we feel so terrible about this, but your room gets so much more natural light. It would be perfect for my photo shoots. And you're so good at making things work, we knew you'd understand. The condescension was so thick I could have choked on it. My brother, Liam, finally decided to contribute. It's just temporary, Kath, just until we find a place. You know how it is. No, I didn't know how it was. I knew I paid $1,200 a month in rent, plus all the utilities and groceries, effectively covering more than half the household expenses. I knew my bedroom was my sanctuary, the one space in the world that was truly mine. The anger began to bubble up, hot and acidic. No, I said, my voice firm. That's not going to work for me. I pay rent here. I live here. This is my room. The atmosphere in the room turned to ice. My mother's smile vanished, replaced by a look of disappointed disapproval. But it was my father's reaction that truly sealed my fate. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump. This isn't up for discussion, he boomed, his voice leaving no room for argument. Your brother is in trouble, and this family helps its own. You're single, you work from home, you don't need the space. They do. Family comes first. Family comes first. The words echoed in the sudden silence. But what he meant was, Liam comes first. It had always been this way. Liam, the golden boy, the musician whose dreams were to be supported at all costs. I was Catherine, the responsible one, the data scientist with a stable job whose contributions were expected and whose comfort was expendable. My rent wasn't seen as a contribution from an adult tenant, it was my filial duty. My room wasn't my home. It was a resource to be reallocated as they saw fit. I looked at their faces, my mother nodding in agreement with my father, my brother looking down at his plate, unable to meet my eyes, my sister-in-law, Sophia, wearing a faint, triumphant smirk. In that instant, I understood with chilling clarity that I wasn't a daughter in their eyes. I was a utility, and my utility had just been downgraded. There was no point in arguing. I would be met with a wall of self-righteous justification, so I did the only thing I could do. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Fine, I said, my voice dangerously calm. I understand perfectly. I turned and walked out of the dining room, ignoring my mother's call of my name. I went upstairs to my room for a few more hours, and pulled my suitcases out of the closet, so I packed my things that night. If I was going to be treated like a temporary guest, I would start acting like one. The first step was leaving the dinner table. The next was leaving their lives, piece by piece. The first night in the garage was a lesson in humility. The single, bare light bulb cast long, dancing shadows that made the stacks of old furniture and forgotten junk look like crouching monsters. The air was damp and smelled of gasoline and mildew. My father had condescended to help me move a cot in, positioning it between a rusty lawnmower and a tower of precariously stacked boxes labeled Christmas. He'd even run an extension cord from the house so I could plug in a lamp and my laptop. See. "It's not so bad," he'd said with forced cheerfulness, as if a power strip was the pinnacle of luxury. "It'll be like camping." He seemed to genuinely believe that a positive attitude could somehow insulate the concrete floor and ward off the chill that was already seeping into my bones. I spent that night huddled under every blanket I owned, listening. To the house settle. I could hear the faint murmur of the television from the living room, the occasional burst of laughter. They were up there, in the warm, comfortable house I helped pay for, living their lives while I was relegated to the cold, dark outbuilding. It wasn't camping. It was banishment. The following morning, the indignity continued. To use the bathroom or the kitchen, I had to walk outside, unlock the back door, and enter the house like a visitor. The first time I did it, I found Sophia in the kitchen, brewing coffee in my expensive French press. She was wearing one of my favorite silk robes, which she had apparently found in the closet of her new room. "Oh, good morning," she chirped, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. "I hope you don't mind. This thing makes amazing coffee." She didn't offer me any. Liam and Sophia settled into my old room, their room now, with astonishing speed. Within days, the space was transformed. My sensible, minimalist decor was replaced with a bohemian explosion of tapestries, fairy lights, and countless throw pillows. My desk, where I worked every day, became Sophia's content creation station, cluttered with makeup palettes and ring lights. My job, which required concentration and quiet, was now subject to the constant thrum of Liam's acoustic guitar practice and Sophia's loud, one-sided conversations with her phone as she recorded videos for her blog. My request for them to keep the noise down between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. was met with a patronizing smile from Sophia. "Oh, sweetie, the creative process can't be scheduled," she'd explained. "You understand." My parents were completely blind to the disruption. In their eyes, the house was now full of life and artistic energy. Helen doted on Sophia, eagerly listening to her vapid stories about brand collaborations and follower engagement. Robert seemed to enjoy having Liam around, falling back into their old dynamic of father and favored son. They would talk for hours about sports or politics, a connection my father and I never had. My presence, once a constant, was now an afterthought. When I entered the kitchen, conversations would halt for a moment before resuming. As if I were a service worker they had to politely acknowledge. The financial arrangement also changed, though no one discussed it with me. I was still expected to transfer my $1,200 on the first of the month, but it became clear that Liam and Sophia were contributing nothing. In fact, they were a net drain. The grocery bills skyrocketed, filled with organic produce, artisanal cheeses, and expensive cuts of meat that only they ate. The utility bills, which I paid, climbed higher as they left lights on in every room and took hour-long showers. When I gently brought this up with my mother, suggesting that perhaps Liam and Sophia could chip in for groceries, she looked at me with genuine hurt. "Catherine, they're struggling," she said in a hushed, wounded tone. "We can't ask them for money. It's our job to support them. Family comes first." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I was supporting them. My money was buying Sophia's organic kale and Liam's craft beer. My money was paying for the hot water for their luxurious showers. But because I wasn't the one with the artistic dream, my support was simply the cost of my existence. I was the foundation, unseen and unthanked, upon which their comfortable lives were being built. The garage became my refuge. I invested in a small space heater that did little to combat the pervasive cold, but provided a small psychological comfort. I set up my workspace on a rickety folding table and did my best to tune out the noise from the house. I started eating my meals out there, heating up soup on a hot plate I'd bought. I was slowly seceding from the family, creating my own self-contained, miserable little kingdom in the garage. My best friend, Maya, was horrified when I told her about the situation. She came over one afternoon under the pretense of picking something up, and I gave her the grand tour of my new living quarters. Her eyes widened as she took in the concrete floor and the stacks of junk. "Kat, this is not okay," she said, her voice a mixture of anger and disbelief. "This is insane. They've basically kicked you out of your own home." "Technically, it's their home," I mumbled, picking at a loose thread on my sweater. "I just pay for most of it." "That's not the point, and you know it," she insisted. "They're exploiting you. Your parents, your brother, that ridiculous sister-in-law of yours. You need to leave." "And go where?" I asked, the hopelessness of the situation washing over me. "The rental market is a nightmare. Everything I can afford is miles from here, and I'm so close to having enough for a down payment. If I start paying market rent now, it will set me back years." We sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the hum of the old freezer in the corner. Maya, a real estate agent, had a practi. Cal, no-nonsense mind, I could see the gears turning in her head. "You said they had to move because their landlord was selling?" she asked. I nodded. "Do you know the address?" I did. Liam had complained about it enough that it was seared into my memory. Maya pulled out her phone and started typing, her expression growing more and more intrigued. "Interesting," she murmured. "Very interesting." She looked up at me, a slow, calculating smile spreading across her face. "You know, Kat," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, "there's more than one way to get your own place, and sometimes the best opportunities come from the most infuriating situations." She wouldn't say more, but a seed had been planted. For the first time in weeks, the suffocating feeling of helplessness began to recede, replaced by a tiny, unfamiliar flicker of something else, an idea. The cold reality of the garage hadn't broken me. It had forged me into something harder, something more determined. I had been pushed out, but I was about to find my own way back in, on my own terms. Life in the garage settled into a grim routine. I would wake up early, shivering, and make the cold dash to the house to shower before anyone else was awake. I'd work all day at my makeshift desk, headphones on, trying to build a wall of sound to block out the life I was no longer a part of. In the evenings, I'd often stay in the garage, avoiding the family dinner table and the strained, superficial conversations. This self-imposed isolation had an unexpected side effect. It made me a better observer. Detached from the family unit, I started to see things I had previously missed, blinded by affection and obligation. The first crack in Liam and Sophia's struggling artists narrative appeared in the form of a shopping bag. Sophia had come home one afternoon laden with bags from a high-end boutique downtown. She'd tried to sneak them into the house, but I'd been on my way to the kitchen and saw her before she could scurry upstairs. "Oh, these," she'd said breezily when she saw me eyeing the logos. "Just some things the brand sent me, for a collaboration." But later that evening, I saw the receipt in the kitchen trash. It was not a collaboration, it was a $900 purchase. I couldn't reconcile the image of a financially strapped couple with a receipt that was worth 3/4 of my monthly rent payment. Then there were the whispers. The walls in the old house were thin, and my parents weren't as quiet as they thought. One night, as I was walking past their bedroom on the way to the bathroom, I heard my mother's anxious voice. "Robert, another one? That's the third time this month. We can't keep doing this." My father's reply was a low rumble, but I could make out the words. "He'll pay us back, Helen. He just needs a little more time to get that recording contract sorted out. It's a sure thing." A transfer. To Liam, so this was how they were staying afloat, not by budgeting or cutting back, but by bleeding my parents dry. My parents, who were supposed to be enjoying their retirement, were instead funding their 31-year-old son's extended adolescence. The more I watched, the more inconsistencies I saw. They ate out several times a week, always at trendy, expensive restaurants, which Sophia would meticulously document for her blog. Liam bought a new, top-of-the-line guitar that he claimed a friend had given him. Their story was a house of cards, and I was beginning to see just how flimsy its construction was. The anger that had been simmering inside me began to boil. It wasn't just about my room anymore. It was about the blatant deception. They were lying to my parents, taking advantage of their love and generosity, all while I was shivering in the garage, dutifully paying my share and more. They were parasites, and my parents were the willing hosts. I met Maya for coffee a few days later, my mind buzzing with suspicion. I laid out everything I had observed: the shopping sprees, the expensive dinners, the overheard conversation about money transfers. "They're lying, Maya," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "I know they are. They're not struggling. They're playing a part. Maya listened intently, stirring her latte with a thoughtful expression. She had already done some preliminary digging on the rental house Liam and Sophia had been forced to leave. "You're right to be suspicious," she said finally. "The house they were renting is owned by a lovely older couple, the Hendersons. I know them through a colleague. They're in their late 70s and they're moving to Florida to be closer to their grandkids. They want a quiet, simple sale. No fuss, no bidding wars. They just want to sell to someone who will appreciate the house." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee and looking at me over the rim of the cup. "The house is a 2-bedroom bungalow. It's modest, but it's in a great neighborhood, and the price they're thinking of listing at is, well, it's very reasonable. It's almost exactly the amount you told me you have saved for a down payment." The unspoken suggestion hung in the air between us. My heart started to beat a little faster. "You can't be serious," I whispered. "I can't buy a house. Not right now." "Why not?" she countered, her voice full of conviction. "You have a great job with a stable income. You have a significant down payment saved. Your credit is excellent. You're the perfect candidate for a mortgage, Kat. You've been living in a garage to save that money. Don't you think it's time you used it to buy yourself some freedom?" The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. To buy a house. To be a homeowner. It was the dream that had kept me going, the reason I had put up with living at home for so long. But to buy that specific house, the one my brother and his wife had been renting, the audacity of it was breathtaking. "But what would I even do with it?" I asked, my mind struggling to catch up. "I can't live there while they owe." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and Maya's grin told me she knew I'd gotten there. I wouldn't be buying a home to live in. I would be buying an investment property. I would become their landlord. "Think about it," Maya said, leaning forward. "You buy the house. You become the legal owner. You get to set the terms. They want to live there. Fine. They can pay you rent. Market rate rent. No more free rides subsidized by your parents." The plan was so simple, yet so profound. It was a way to reclaim my power, to turn their deception and my family's disregard into my own financial and personal victory. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. It was about holding Liam and Sophia accountable for their actions in a language they would understand. Money. But to do it, I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly what their financial situation was. If I was going to make such a bold move, I had to be absolutely certain that they could afford it, that I wasn't just being cruel, but that I was forcing them to finally live within their actual, hidden means. "I need to know for sure," I told Maya, my voice filled with a new, steely resolve. "I need to see the numbers." I was a data scientist. My entire career was built on finding patterns and truth in mountains of information. It was time to apply those skills to my own life. I was going to follow the money, and I had a feeling it would lead me to a truth my parents had refused to see, and to a plan that would change everything. The whispers in the dark had given me a direction. Now, I just needed a map. The decision to investigate my own brother's finances felt like crossing a line. It was a violation of trust, a step into a morally gray area that made me deeply uncomfortable. But then I would look at the cold concrete walls of the garage, remember Sophia's smug smile as she wore my robe, and the discomfort would be replaced by a cold, hard determination. They had already shattered any trust I had in them. If they were willing to lie to our parents and exploit their generosity, they had forfeited any right to privacy regarding those lies. My plan wasn't to hack into their bank accounts or do anything illegal. I was a data scientist, not a cybercriminal. My approach would be more subtle, based on observation and open-source intelligence. The digital breadcrumbs people leave scattered all over the internet. I started with Sophia's lifestyle blog and her social media presence. For months, I had tuned out her endless posts about brunch, fashion, and living your most authentic life. Now, I scrolled through her history with the focused eye of an auditor. Every post was a data point. I cross-referenced the restaurants she tagged with their online menus, calculating the approximate cost of their frequent meals out. I used reverse image search on her new outfits, finding them on boutique websites and noting their prices. The brand collaborations she boasted about were flimsy. The brands were small, often with no discernible online presence, and the engagement on her posts was suspiciously low, full of generic comments from bot-like accounts. It was a carefully curated illusion of success. The real breakthrough, however, came from Liam. My brother had always been technologically careless. He was one of those people who used the same simple password for everything and never logged out of his accounts. One afternoon, while I was in the house to grab a book from my old room, now a minefield of Sophia's clutter, I noticed his laptop was open on the kitchen counter. He had been checking his email and had walked away, leaving it open for anyone to see. My heart pounded in my chest. It felt like a test. I glanced around. The house was empty. With trembling hands, I walked over to the laptop. His inbox was open. I didn't have to snoop for long. Near the top was an email from a digital music distribution service. The subject line was, "Your Q3 royalty statement is available." My curiosity overrode my guilt. I clicked it open. The email contained a link to a dashboard. He was still logged in. I navigated to his statements and my jaw dropped. Liam wasn't just a struggling freelance musician. He was earning a steady, significant stream of passive income. He had composed a library of stock music years ago, generic, upbeat tracks perfect for commercials and YouTube videos. He had sold the rights to this distribution service, and every time one of his tracks was used, he got a small royalty payment. Individually, the payments were tiny, but there were thousands of them. The quarterly statements showed a consistent income of several $1,000s a month. It wasn't enough to make him rich, but it was more than enough to afford a decent apartment. Combined with what I suspected my parents were giving him, he and Sophia should have been perfectly comfortable. This discovery changed the entire equation. Their story of being forced out of their apartment wasn't just an exaggeration, it was a complete fabrication. They weren't in financial trouble. They had simply decided they didn't want to pay rent anymore. Why should they, when they could move home, live for free in the best room in the house, have their bills and food paid for, and get regular cash infusions from their parents, all while banking Liam's hidden income? It was a calculated, parasitic grift. They weren't just taking advantage of our parents. They were systematically draining them of their retirement savings to fund a lifestyle they were pretending they couldn't afford. The anger I felt was pure and clarifying. This wasn't just about my discomfort or the injustice of my situation. It was about protecting my parents from their own son. I took out my phone and discreetly took pictures of the royalty statements on the screen, documenting the income for the past 2 years. This was my proof. This was the data that would justify everything that was to come. I closed the laptop, my hands no longer shaking. My purpose was clear. I left the kitchen and went back to the garage, my mind racing. I immediately called Maya. "I have it," I said, my voice low but buzzing with energy. "I have proof. He has a secret source of income. A significant one." I sent her the photos, and she called me back a few minutes later, her voice impressed. "Wow, just wow, this is more than enough. Kat, they have been playing your parents for absolute fools." "So the plan is still on?" I asked, a thrill of nervous excitement running through me. "The plan is a go," Maya confirmed. "I've already spoken to the Hendersons. They're motivated sellers. They hate the idea of a big corporation buying the place and tearing it down. The thought of a single owner, someone young who will take care of the place, really appeals to them. I've pitched you as the ideal buyer, a responsible, local professional looking for her first property." Over the next few weeks, Maya and I worked in secret. She guided me through the process of getting a formal mortgage pre-approval. I gathered my financial documents, pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, and sent them to the lender. My steady job and substantial savings made the process surprisingly smooth. The bank approved me for a loan that was more than enough to cover the Hendersons' asking price. The next step was making an offer. Maya advised we act quickly and decisively. "We'll offer their full asking price, with a quick closing date and very few conditions," she explained. "For sellers like them, a simple, guaranteed sale is more valuable than a few extra $1,000s from a drawn-out bidding war." We drafted the offer. Signing my name on that document was one of the most terrifying and empowering moments of my life. I was no longer just reacting to my family's decisions, I was making a massive one of my own. I was taking control. Maya submitted the offer, and all I could do was wait. The next 48 hours were agonizing. I barely slept, replaying every possible scenario in my head. What if they rejected it? What if another buyer came in? What if my parents found out? Every creak of the house, every footstep made me jump. I lived in a state of high alert, my secret held tightly in my chest. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Maya. I answered on the first ring, my heart in my throat. "They accepted," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "No counteroffer, no conditions. They loved your letter. Catherine, you're going to be a homeowner." I sank down onto my cot in the garage, the phone still pressed to my ear, a wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy. I had done it. I had bought a house. Their house. The money trail had led me to the truth, and the truth had led me here to this moment. The game had changed. I wasn't the pawn being moved around the board anymore. I was the one about to say, checkmate. The period between the offer being accepted and the final closing date was a masterclass in covert operations. It spanned nearly 2 months of inspections, appraisals, and mountains of paperwork, all of which had to be done without my family's knowledge. My life became a series of whispered phone calls in my car, clandestine meetings with Maya at coffee shops miles from our neighborhood, and late nights spent poring over documents by the dim light of the lamp in my garage. My official work hours were from 9 to 5, but my real job, the one that consumed my thoughts, was the acquisition of 14 Elm Street. My double life was exhausting. At home, I had to maintain the facade of the compliant, downtrodden daughter. I continued to pay my rent, continued to live in the garage, and continued to endure the casual slights from Liam and Sophia. They had grown so accustomed to my passive presence that they barely noticed me anymore. I was just part of the furniture, the quiet girl who lived amongst the paint cans and old tires. This invisibility, NCE a source of pain, became my greatest asset. They never suspected a thing. Sophia would complain loudly about her fruitless apartment search, lamenting how every decent place was snapped up instantly. Liam would bemoan the cutthroat rental market, all while I was actively participating in the property market, signing documents that would soon make me their landlord. The dramatic irony was so thick, it was almost comical. Maya was my general, my co-conspirator. She handled the communications with the sellers and the lawyers, ensuring my name was kept as quiet as possible until the final deed was registered. She walked me through every step, explaining the esoteric language of real estate contracts and mortgage agreements. "The Hendersons are thrilled," she told me during one of our secret meetings. "They're so happy it's not going to a developer. They asked about you, and I told them you were a quiet, professional young woman who values community. They have no idea how right I am." Saving money became my obsession. I knew that once the house was mine, I would have a mortgage to pay, property taxes, insurance, and the potential costs of being a landlord. I cut back on every possible expense. I stopped ordering takeout, brewed my own coffee in the garage on my hot plate, and canceled all my subscription services. Every dollar I saved was another brick in the wall of my independence. The garage, my cold, concrete prison, became a crucible. It stripped away my comfort and forced me to focus on my one singular goal. The hardship fueled my resolve. Every chilly night, every inconvenient trip to the house for the bathroom was a reminder of what I was working for. As the closing date approached, my anxiety grew. The final step was the transfer of the down payment and closing costs. It was a substantial amount of money, the entirety of my life savings, and moving it felt terrifyingly real. I had to go to the bank in person to authorize the wire transfer. I took a half-day off work, telling my parents I had a dentist appointment. Sitting in the bank manager's office, watching on the screen as a lifetime of discipline and sacrifice was transferred to an anonymous legal firm, I felt a moment of panic. Was this crazy? Was I making a colossal mistake? But then I pictured my father's dismissive face as he said, "This isn't up for discussion." I pictured Sophia in my robe, using my things as if they were hers. The doubt vanished, replaced by a certainty that was as solid as the foundation of the house I was about to own. The day the house closed, I received an email from my lawyer with the subject line, "Congratulations." Attached was a series of documents, but the one that mattered was the deed. There, in crisp black digital ink, was my name, Catherine M. Wallace, owner of the property at 14 Elm Street. I read it over and over again. I was a homeowner, a landlord. I owned the roof over my brothers' and sister-in-law's heads. The feeling was not one of triumphant glee, but of quiet, profound satisfaction. It was the feeling of a plan perfectly executed. My 6-month strategy had begun the night I was exiled to the garage. The first 2 months were spent in misery and observation. The next 2 were spent in secret planning and investigation. The final 2 were spent in executing the purchase. 6 months of my life had been leading up to this point. I had endured the cold, the disrespect, and the feeling of being an outsider in my own home. I had channeled all that pain and anger not into petty arguments, but into a single, life-altering financial transaction. Now, it was time for the final phase of the plan, the confrontation. I called Maya. "It's done," I said, my voice steady. "The house is mine." "I'll have the papers drawn up by tomorrow," she replied, her voice brimming with professional pride. "The official notice to the tenants and a brand new lease agreement. How do you want to proceed?" I thought for a moment. I could have delivered the news myself. I could have orchestrated a dramatic reveal, but that wasn't my style. This entire operation had been conducted with quiet, professional precision, and that's how it would end. "Have a legal courier deliver it," I said. "I don't want there to be any ambiguity. This is not a family discussion. This is a business transaction." The next day, Maya sent me a draft of the new lease for my approval. It was a standard, ironclad rental agreement, and on the first page, under the section for monthly rent, was a new number. I had asked Maya to research the current fair market value for a 2-bedroom house in that neighborhood. The number she came back with was almost exactly 3 times what Liam and Sophia had been paying the Hendersons. It was a fair price, a legal price. And I knew, thanks to my research, it was a price they could absolutely afford to pay. I replied to her email with a single word: perfect. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait. The day the courier delivered the envelope was an ordinary Thursday. I was working in the garage, trying to debug a piece of code, when I heard the doorbell ring. I peered out the grimy window and saw a man in a uniform handing a large, official-looking document envelope to Sophia, who had answered the door. She took it with a look of mild confusion, signing for it on his electronic tablet before closing the door. I knew exactly what was in that envelope. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation. I turned away from the window and tried to focus on my computer screen, but it was impossible. The next few minutes stretched into an eternity. The silence was broken by a sudden, piercing shriek from inside the house. It was Sophia. The shriek was followed by a string of furious, muffled words, and then Liam's deeper voice joining in, questioning and alarmed. I could practically visualize the scene. Sophia tearing open the envelope, her confusion turning to disbelief, and then to pure rage as she read the legal notice informing them of the property's change of ownership. I imagined her eyes scanning down to the new lease agreement, her brain struggling to process the name of the new owner and the tripled rent amount listed in bold type. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was Liam. I ignored it. It buzzed again almost immediately. A text message this time, all caps. "Call me right now." Another text seconds later. "What is this? Is this a joke?" My phone began to ring again. This time it was Sophia. I let it go to voicemail. Then Liam again. They were panicking, their carefully constructed world crumbling around them, and they were reaching for the person they thought they could control. For the next 10 minutes, my phone was a relentless assault of calls and texts, a digital tantrum. "Catherine, I know you're there, pick up the phone. This isn't funny. Our lawyer will hear about this." I found that last one particularly amusing, given I was now their landlord and had every legal right to do what I was doing. Finally, after about 15 minutes of this barrage, I heard the back door of the house slam open. Heavy, angry footsteps crunched on the gravel path leading to the garage. The garage door was flung open with such force that it slammed against the wall, making a stack of old magazines topple over. Liam stood there, his face a mask of furious disbelief. Sophia was right behind him, her face blotchy and red, the legal documents clutched in her hand. "What is the meaning of this?" Liam demanded, his voice trembling with rage. He stormed towards me, waving his phone in my face. "My phone has been blowing up with alerts from our rental app. It says our lease is terminated and a new one has been issued by Wallace Properties LLC. Sophia shoved the papers she was holding towards me. "It says the rent is tripled, and it says the new owner is you." She said the last word with such venomous contempt it was as if she'd tasted something foul. I calmly swiveled in my chair to face them, taking a slow sip of the cold coffee on my desk. I looked from my brother's enraged face to my sister-in-law's tear-streaked one, and I felt nothing but a cool, calm sense of finality. "That's right," I said, my voice even. "I bought the house. I'm your new landlord." The simplicity of my statement seemed to stun them into a momentary silence. They had clearly expected me to be defensive or perhaps apologetic. They had come out here for a fight, for a dramatic family confrontation they could win through emotional manipulation. They were not prepared for me to treat this as a simple statement of fact. You what?" Liam stammered. "How? Why?" "How is not your concern," I replied, standing up. I was no longer the little sister they could push around. I was the owner of their home. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. As for why, let's just say I was looking for a good investment, and this one came up. It's a lovely property. "You can't do this," Sophia shrieked, finding her voice again. "We'll be homeless. We can't afford that much rent. You're trying to evict us." "I'm not evicting you," I said calmly, correcting her. "I am offering you a new lease at the current market rate, the same rate anyone else would pay for a 2-bedroom house in this neighborhood. You have 30 days to sign the new lease, or you can choose to vacate the property. The choice is entirely yours." I paused, letting the words sink in. "And as for affording it, I think you can." I looked directly at Liam. "Your royalty checks alone should cover it quite comfortably." The color drained from my brother's face. The mention of his secret income was a direct hit, and he knew it. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently, the rage in his eyes being replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. He finally realized this wasn't a random act of cruelty. This was a calculated response. "You have been lying," I continued, my voice low and steady, all the frustration of the past 6 months pouring out in a controlled, deliberate flow. "You've been lying to Mom and Dad. You've been bleeding them dry, taking their retirement money, all while you had a perfectly good income you never told them about. You had me moved into a garage, a cold, damp, miserable space, so you could have my room and live here for FR. You did all that under the guise of being a struggling family in need. Well, the charity is over." The confrontation they had wanted was happening, but it was entirely on my terms. The garage, once my prison, had become my throne room. They stood before me, stripped of their lies, their entitlement rendered powerless. "You'll be hearing from our parents?" Sophia threatened, her last resort. "They will not let you do this to us." "I'm sure I will," I said with a small, humorless smile. "But you seem to be confused about something. My relationship with my parents is my business. My relationship with you from this point forward is strictly professional. You are my tenants. This is your new lease. Sign it or don't. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Please close the door on your way out." I turned my back on them and sat down at my desk, effectively dismissing them. For a long moment, they stood there, utterly defeated. Then I heard them turn and leave, the sound of their footsteps on the gravel path no longer angry, but heavy with the weight of their own deception. They didn't slam the garage door. They closed it quietly behind them. As I had predicted, it didn't take long for the phone call from my mother to come. It was about an hour after Liam and Sophia's retreat from the garage. I let it ring 3 times before answering, composing myself and taking a deep breath. I knew this would be the final, most difficult battle. "Catherine, what have you done?" Helen's voice was not angry. It was worse. It was thick with tears and a profound, theatrical sense of betrayal. It was the voice she used when she was deeply disappointed. a weapon she had wielded with expert precision my entire life. "I bought an investment property, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone neutral and businesslike. "You bought your brother's home out from under him?" she cried, her voice cracking. "Sophia called me. She's hysterical. You're tripling their rent. You're trying to make your own family homeless. How could you be so cruel, so vindictive?" The accusations washed over me, but for the first time they didn't sting. They sounded hollow, rehearsed. I had the truth on my side. "I'm not making anyone homeless," I stated calmly. "I've offered them a new lease. They have a choice. And the rent is the fair market value for the property. I'm running a business, not a charity." "A business?" she scoffed through her tears. "This is your brother, this is family. What happened to you? Living out in that garage has made you hard and cold." "You're right," I said, and the admission seemed to surprise her into silence. Living in that garage did change me. It gave me a lot of time to think, and a lot of time to observe. And then I laid it all out for her. I told her about Liam's secret royalty income, quoting the quarterly figures I had seen. I told her about the thousands of dollars my father had been quietly transferring to him. I told her about Sophia's $900 shopping trips and their expensive dinners out. I explained, with the dispassionate clarity of a data analyst presenting a report, that they were not struggling. They were solvent, and they had been systematically deceiving her and Dad for their own financial gain. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, the sound of her world being reconfigured. He wouldn't lie to us," she finally whispered, but the conviction was gone from her voice. It was a plea, not a statement. "Why wouldn't he tell us he had money?" "Because if he told you, the free ride would be over," I said, softening my tone slightly. This was my mother, after all, and she was a victim in this too. "If he told you, you wouldn't have let him move in, and you certainly wouldn't have let me be moved into the garage. He and Sophia wanted to have it all. Bank his income, live for free, and use your money to fund their lifestyle. Mom, they were taking advantage of you." I let that sink in before delivering the final, crucial blow. "You and Dad taught me the importance of being responsible and independent. I have a good job, I save my money, and I pay my bills. All I've done is create a situation where Liam is now expected to do the same. He's a 31-year-old man. It's time he stood on his own 2 feet instead of on your retirement fund." The conversation ended soon after that. She was no longer crying, just quiet and thoughtful. She didn't apologize, but she didn't defend Liam either. The seeds of doubt had been planted in the fertile ground of hard evidence. The aftermath was swift and decisive. My father called me later that evening. His tone was gruff, but the booming anger was gone. "Did you know about this?" was all I asked him, referring to Liam's income. "No," he said, and the word was heavy with shame. "We didn't." That was the end of the conversation. It was all the admission of fault I would ever get, and it was enough. 2 weeks later, a signed copy of Th. new lease agreement appeared in my new post office box. Liam and Sophia had signed it. They had accepted the terms. They would be paying the full tripled rent. They had no other choice. Their lies had been exposed, and their primary source of funding, my parents, had been cut off. My mother and father, faced with the undeniable truth of their son's deception, had finally turned off the financial tap. Liam and Sophia had been forced to face the real world, a world where you have to pay for your own roof. I never moved back into the house. The day after the lease was signed, I packed the last of my things from the garage and moved into a small, clean, and wonderfully warm apartment that I'd found near my new property. The garage, my home for 6 long months, was now just an empty, concrete shell. It no longer held any power over me. It was just a place, and I was free. My relationship with my family is complicated. It's strained and distant. The Sunday dinners have stopped. I see my parents occasionally, and our conversations are polite but shallow. They are grappling with the new reality of their son, and I am building a new life for myself, one where my value is not determined by my utility to others.